so with discourse markers in particular, whether that's in English or in Japanese, then all of a sudden it's like the clouds part and the sun comes out and the output sounds so much more conversational or so much more natural. And I think that part of what, you know, puts people with a background in linguistics at an advantage is we have studied and been taught to think of language in these very specific ways, that they have these specific parts that do a function and that those parts are named and then we can talk about them in a systematic manner. Not everybody, I think, particularly whether it's in, you know, the US or in Japan, we're not taught to think reflectively about our language in that way. Like even in
Mm.
Japanese, there have been times where actually, yeah, in my first couple months here in Japan, you know, people would say, "Oh, this conversation seems a little awkward." And I'd say, "Okay, what makes it awkward?" And they would say things like, "Well, it seems a little cold," or "It seems a little stiff." And I had to be the one from a linguistics perspective to say, "Okay, so what you're talking about is the fact that there's no what they call in Japanese aizuchi or discourse markers in these sentences." And so I wasn't totally sure. I went into the prompt. I said, "Okay, put discourse markers at the front of, you know, I don't know, every other sentence or something like that." And then once it came in, it's, you know, the reaction was incredible. It was like people's minds were blown. And I think of
Ah.
it as, it goes back to what you were mentioning from Jakob Nielsen earlier, where it sounds like how to tickle the LLM in the right spot, or
Mm-hmm.
like the snake charmer or whatever. Like I'm suddenly this person who can control
Right.
GPT in a way that others don't necessarily understand. And I don't think of it as much magic as I think of it more as sort of science from the linguistics perspective. I
Mm-hmm.
want you to do this particular, I think particularly within the subfield of linguistics called sociolinguistics, which is how we use language in everyday practice in social situations, or discourse analysis, which is, you know, how we use language in conversation. It's been so meticulously described, the, you know, kinds of things and phenomena that happen in conversation, the objective of what you're trying to do in conversation, and what that's called, that after spending, you know, over a decade of my life figuring out how to describe what people do and how they're doing it in conversation, now I just flip it and say, I want you to do these things. And that
Right.
becomes the prompt.
Thinking about then the difference between the output between OpenAI and Anthropic in this case,
Mm.
where OpenAI does not use discourse markers and Anthropic does. Do you feel that that is potentially a matter of the way that the underlying LLMs are? I don't want to use the word trained, but I'll just use that
Mhm.
word for convenience.
Sure.
Or is it a matter of their system prompt, meaning the stuff that's tacked on the end after the prompt? Or is it the temperature setting, meaning the friendliness or
Hmm.
the I mean all the things that come along with temperature? And I guess to
Hmm.
briefly explain it to listeners, it's how friendly and randomized is it versus kind of predictable and cold. You can turn it up or turn it down.
Hmm.
Uh, or is it kind of a combination of all of the above, do you think? Because I mean we don't get a lot of, that's all their proprietary stuff, we don't really know,
Yeah.
right? But I mean what's your best guess there?
I think it's a combination of the three. One thing that I did notice is that there's more discourse, no pun intended, there's more conversation, discussion about discourse markers when it comes to prompt engineering. I can't remember for sure if I saw this, but if you don't, I highly recommend following Pliny the prompter on Twitter, because they are like the highest of high priests, priestesses of prompt hacking. And so
Cool.
often what I see is discussions about system prompts in their threads. And I want to say I've seen something recently about discourse markers in particular. I can't say for sure if discourse
Okay.
markers was present in, like that phrase was present in the Anthropic system prompt or not. I'd have to double check because my memory is a bit fuzzy at the moment. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's basically what I'm saying, is that if discourse markers is present in the Anthropic, you know, Claude 3 system prompt, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, because that's the biggest difference, is that I have to
Mm.
explicitly tell OpenAI, put discourse markers in your output in this way, regardless of whether it's GPT-4, GPT Turbo, GPT Omni. With Anthropic, I don't have to.